We'll begin this final session of our national gathering. It is so wonderful to see all of you here today. My name is Dr. Andra Basu, and I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean for the faculty here at Chestnut Hill College. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, formerly from Chestnut Hill College, Dr. Suzanne del Gizzo, has been a professor of English and center chair for integrated humanities at Chestnut Hill College for close to 20 years. In February, she became the Dean of Liberal Arts at Montgomery County Community College, also in Pennsylvania. Suzanne is a scholar of modern American literature. She has published 3 edited volumes, more than 20 articles, and serves as the editor of the Hemingway Review. Just to share that at Chestnut Hill College, she also co-chaired with another professor, Jackie Wright, the curriculum review that was established here between 20 and 22. She is excited to share some of her thoughts about the approach that was taken during this curriculum review, where we were charged at Chestnut Hill College with infusing the mission of the college into the core curriculum while really increasing student engagement and retention. So at this point, I am very excited to introduce Dr. Del Gizzo. And if everyone, if you have questions and comments after the presentation, if you could put those in the chat. Anyone who's been in prior sessions already is aware of that. But then once we have the Q&A session, we'll be able to look at your questions there. All right, so without further ado at this point, I want to turn it over to Dr. Del Gizzo.
Hi, everyone. I am unmuted. Yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Andra, for that introduction. I just wanted to begin by saying how happy I am to be invited here today. As Andra just let you know, I left Chestnut Hill a couple of months ago. And when I took the new position, I wrote to Martha immediately. I said, full confession, I'm leaving Chestnut Hill College. Do you still want me to be a part of the national gathering? To which she responded something that in my heart I probably already knew, which was once a part of the family, always a part of the family. So thank you, Martha, for that. And it's all to say that I'm very glad to be back here with my ACSSJ colleagues. I'm so happy that you have me here today. Okay, so I want to say 2 things to contextualize this presentation that I'm going to give before I turn over and go live with the slideshow. The talk is transactional versus transformational education. And it's really part of a bunch of work I've been doing lately on this concept about moving from transaction to transformation. It started, I guess, when I was working with Jackie Reich in the core curriculum review committee. We didn't articulate it that way at the time. But right before or right during that process, I was asked to give a talk at a mission day at the college about how we delivered on our promise for giving students a holistic, transformative holistic education. And that was the first time these words started to bounce around in my mind. Then a little bit later, I started to think about this idea in relationship to not just the core curriculum, but to curriculum more broadly. So last fall at Elms College, I gave a talk that was similar to this one about core curriculum, but in June, I'll be giving another talk as part of a working group in Washington, D.C., where we're really focusing on how AI, of all things, provides us an opportunity in academic leadership to refocus students on the importance of personal transformation. Essentially, our logic goes like this, that if students view their education as merely transactional, they're more tempted to cognitively offload their learning onto AI. And the presentation looks for ways to change mindsets, pedagogy, and assessments so that we facilitate, assess, and track personal transformation. And those are the kinds of things that we're trying to look at, is how to get better at tracking and measuring transformation. And that's part of what we're doing there. So all of this work is an attempt to kind of claw back the importance of personal transformative learning, away from the rhetoric of transformation, which really puts students and their families in the mindset of valuing the education and the certificate that represents it as a way of getting jobs. But as we all know, that's just one small piece of the picture. The second thing I wanted to point out today is I'm here because of that work on that 2020-22 core curriculum. But what I'm presenting to you were the ideas that we put on the paper. But as many of my colleagues from Chestnut Hill, I don't know how many of you might be here, we know that implementation presents another challenge. So I'm going to try to talk to both of those things. When the committee disbanded, we left everybody with what we thought were really strong ideas for implementation. And some of those were realized and some of those were not. So I will discuss some of the things that I would do differently toward the end of the presentation. But for now, I want to simply say that when you're trying to do something that is really innovative academically, nothing will actually go exactly as planned. That's impossible. But one thing that I realized is that often we don't plan for or make changes to the administrative systems and processes that need to support the change. And so that's something I want to talk about towards the end, the importance of coordinating not just the faculty vision for curriculum, but the administrative supports and processes that will enable that change to move forward productively. So perhaps one of my biggest takeaways from my experience, both at Chestnut Hill leading that core curriculum review with Jackie, but also now in my role as a dean, is the importance of closely aligning the academic vision with the administration and the processes that you're going to need to achieve the academic vision. So I'm going to say with all the challenges that and all the hard work that is, it's really important because I believe, and I think many of us share this position, that we are at an inflection point in higher education, and especially at four-year liberal arts institutions. And we need to reimagine how we deliver student learning experiences so that we can really serve the students that we're meeting today. So that's the background of how I came to the topic and what I'm presenting today. So if you give me one moment, I will share my screen and we can get rolling. Okay. All right, is everyone seeing the shared screen? Okay, great. Okay, so as I said, I'm here because with Jackie Reich, I co-led a curriculum review, core curriculum review at Chestnut Hill College between 2020 and 2022. So you can imagine on top of, the fraught enterprise that always is, we were trying to do that during COVID. So it adds a bit of extra energy. But after all the years of working on the review, and then there are, I guess, 3 years into implementing it now, plus some of the lessons I think I've already learned in my new role, this is a topic that I feel really passionately about, and especially around the question of mission, which is such a strength for the Sisters of St. Joseph's School. So I will just get underway and we will see how we go. So this is a real Post-it note. That is not my handwriting. That's a handwriting from a student. So what happened was we have at Chestnut Hill College Griffin Days. These are pre-orientation days in July. And one year, when the core was brand new, they said, why don't you introduce the core curriculum to the students in one of the sessions? And we had this session we called Journey into the Core. And it was really interactive, and there were stations all over the rooms where students moved in groups to learn about different aspects of the core curriculum. And at the end of their interactive experience, we had them put Post-its on a big whiteboard. And our idea was to see, we looked at the Post-its, we tried to group them to see if they had any themes, and we were in real time going to construct our closing remarks around whatever the students saw in the curriculum for themselves. Anyway, there were lots of Post-its that day, but this one is clearly my favorite because this is the dream, right? Um, on that day, we were seeking to help students understand what the core curriculum is, why they're asked to take courses in the curriculum, the core curriculum, and how that core curriculum is a distinctive mark of the Chestnut Hill experience. And this Post-it note led me to believe that, in fact, we did it. And I'm not even a little ashamed to tell you that this Post-it note came from my office at Chestnut Hill into my office at Montgomery County Community College, although I keep it in a drawer now because I didn't do that work there, but I like to have it with me. So one of the questions I think we need to always think about is, why do core curricula matter? Um, it's a really busy space. It's a really fraught space. Here are some of the things we try to do in core curricula: create students who are critical thinkers, problem solvers, people who are spiritually and ethically aware, who are civically and intellectually engaged. They have cross-cultural awareness, a global perspective, and we instill a love of lifelong learning. So this, by the way, I think looking at this slide is always really interesting because it goes to show you how all core curricula are essentially the same, right? Like I'm imagining you can see a lot of your core curriculum's objectives in what I put here. And so it's not really what the objectives are, right? That matters in the core. That's why we're doing it. But each institution shapes their core a little bit differently. And on top of this, on top of these skills or capacities or competencies that we're trying to develop, we're also trying to ensure breadth of knowledge, right? So that they take a literature class, they take a history class, they take a science class, a math class. We're also trying to ensure skill development, right? Both 21st century or new skills and foundational skills. So that means writing, critical thinking, problem solving, but it also means media literacy. And now it used to mean, okay, information literacy, then media literacy, and now AI literacy, right? So it just keeps getting added to and added on. And so there's a lot of skill development we're trying to instill. And then on top of that, we're trying to say that this is a space of institutional distinction. This is where we as an institution come together to do the work of creating the type of person we hope you will be in the world most coherently. Because after that, you go into your majors, and those have different areas of expertise or skill sets. But this is the common space. And for that reason, core is a really high stakes area for a lot of faculty. And you add to all that there's the challenge that you usually do it in 42 or fewer credits, and your mind starts boggling, right? How am I supposed to ensure all these competencies, capacities, skills, the breadth of knowledge? So, it's a moment when you look at it where you are really challenged to ask, how do we deliver these things to our students? Oh, yeah, and it's all rooted in the mission and values of the institution, but we'll come back to that one. So here's the reality check, though. This is something I used to say all the time whenever it got heated in core curriculum review committee meetings. I would say, let's remember students never choose a college because of their core curriculum. Like, we're doing important work, but we're doing a certain kind of important work. Most students don't even know what the shape of their core curriculum is. So, and certainly you're not sitting there going, wow, I'm choosing between school A and school B, but I'm going to go with school A because of its core. That's not a conversation I think many students have. And in some way, that takes the pressure off. But on the other hand, it also asks us to investigate in ourselves, why do we put so much energy into the core curriculum? So on the one hand, there we are trying to instill all these values, skills, competencies and capacities and habits of mind and heart. And then our students approach core sort of usually indifferently, sometimes actually wondering why they have to take the classes in the first place. So there's a bit of disconnect between the energy and investment we put into core and the way most students imagine core. And it's closing the gap between those two things that I'm really interested in thinking about. So, this is what that gap in the core curriculum and the way we see it and the way students see it, I think, reveals that, I was at Chestnut Hill for, as Andra said, just under 20 years, and I've been teaching for 25. And one of the things that I think I see now is that in the past 20 years, there has been a real shift in the students that we're teaching. And this is because we're living in revolutionary times with increasing economic pressure and social pressure. So the things that I decided to signal out are first, the digital revolution, right, which changed our relationship to knowledge. And so that students don't value traditional knowledge the way that perhaps many of us did when we went to education, remembering the dates for the Battle of Hastings or the Spanish Armada, because that kind of information feels infinitely retrievable to them. And that infinite retrievable nature of knowledge has changed, I think, the way students see and value knowledge. And there's so much more to say there, but we'll just leave it there for now. The other thing I think really influenced the current environment in higher ed is the recession of 2008. Um, Increasingly after that recession, students really did see their education more transactionally. Um, Higher education is expensive. They wanted to know they would get a good job, and they don't always understand the value and long-term collateral impact of the things we're asking them to study in the core curriculum. So here's some information, about how much the attitude towards college and college as a means to getting a job has changed. So Gen Z puts great stock in getting a job after graduation. A long-running survey of freshmen nationally of freshmen by the University of California, Los Angeles has found that since 2008, the number one reason students attend college is to get a better job. So that has changed the kinds of experiences those students want in college. They want experiences that have a blend of online and face-to-face instruction. They want a mix of liberal arts, but also professional skill training. They want experiential learning and immersive experiences that help them practice the kinds of real world problems and scenarios they're going to be facing in the world. So that's another factor, just that focus on careers. And last but not least is COVID, which is now 5 years old. But COVID really, if there was a questioning of how much higher ed costs and the value of it prior to COVID, that COVID really accelerated those concerns. We saw a change, I think, in the social landscape and the cultural landscape where people were increasingly skeptical of higher education for a number of different reasons. And that's reflected in the numbers, right? The data of Bureau of Labor Statistics shared that new high school graduates who enrolled in college for the first time in the fall of 2020 was the lowest it had been in 2 decades, reaching only 62.7%. And all of this, and I know we just recently saw an uptick, so there is hope, but just acknowledging more current numbers there. But all of this, along with the fact that the students that we were receiving in 2021, 2022, we had questions about preparedness and well-being that we hadn't seen before as well, because they spent a year or more in isolation and they experienced learning and social learning deficits. On top of that, Gen Z, I know we're into Gen Alpha now, but Gen Z, actually 82% of them say that when thinking about a college, they think of safety, well-being, and belongingness as a top priority, not academic rigor. They want to feel like they belong to their institutions. So with all that in mind, here we are, right? The course is a space where we think we do our work most coherently. But also core curriculum feels the least directly applicable to our students who have this transactional, those of them that have this transactional approach to education. That's the problem, but not all is lost. This ugly slide is actually probably my most important slide, right? Because it does sound like we're at odds with our students, but we're really not. Students want to belong. They want to feel engaged. I would argue they even want to feel transformed by their education, but they just don't see how core curriculum is doing that, right? They need to understand how the language we're speaking around core curriculum, where we have those same goals, how do we help them see that those are the goals? And I think the answer is in mission, because students, we know they want to feel a purpose in their life. And then they have the classes in the core curriculum. And the thing that can help us connect their desire for purpose with what we're doing in the classroom is the mission of our institutions. And so I say this a lot, but I really do believe that mission has to infuse core. And I also believe somewhat contentiously that it isn't so much what you teach in core, but how you teach your core classes that matter. So this is, I think, just to say, this is the place. Mission gives us the lens to connect students to their purpose. And everything that we do has to be student-centered. How is this class helping connect students to a sense of their motivation, the purpose, the reason that they're here? And that's what I think, our core curriculum attempted to do. So at Chestnut Hill. So what I will go through now are some practical tips, some of which we did better than others. But these are all things that I really believe help us student center a core, move a core away from something that is a bunch of check boxes, classes they have to get through, and really instead helps them imagine the core curriculum as something that connects them to their larger purpose in life. So the first is tell a story and keep telling it. This is practical thought number one. I think it's really important to present the core curriculum as its own path, its own set of objectives, its own set of goals, and it really helps students see that, understand it, and own it. One thing we did, and this is a really big slide, so my apologies, I promise I will break it down in a minute. Don't even try to read it. I know it was just to give you a sense of what it looks like on the web page. Is we named the different areas of the core curriculum so they could see what it was we wanted them to get out of each area. So the way we did it is we created what's called the discovery curriculum. These are really first year classes, and they're classes where we're trying to help students acclimate to their college career and college level work and responsibilities. We are reviewing and renewing, as it says there, technologies and communication skills vital for whatever else they have coming up in the core and in their majors. So we have a first year experience class that we call Welcome to CHC, a discovery seminar, which is really about reading and learning how to read closely. We use a classical text for the most part model. It's a mix, but we don't shy away from classical texts with a sort of global perspective on those texts. And then, of course, college writing and foreign language and culture. So these are all of those places where they're testing themselves and discovering their basic skills and the things that they need to move forward. If the next level, and it's not really levels as much as a circle, is the mission curriculum. Now, mission infuses the entire curriculum. It really does. But these were courses that highlighted certain aspects of the college's mission, where students were not just challenged to understand the mission, but to live it in some way. And so here we have the religious studies course, a class we call global studies, which is about global awareness, global perspective taking, cross-cultural awareness, and an ethics course. And so mission is infused into these courses in a very specific and practical way. The next set is the inquiry curriculum. And these are our traditional distributionals. The distributionals that at many institutions look like literature or history or social sciences or science. One of the decisions we made, somewhat controversially, was not to name the distributionals after any of the disciplines. And our reasoning was this. If we say, here's a literature, here's a history, I actually had a student the other day say to me, oh, it's like high school again. I was like, ooh, no, that's not the goal, right? So if you name it something like that, history, literature, it feels like a roster of classes they would have taken in high school. In addition, those are our disciplines. Those are the way we approach the world. But what students want to know is what skills, capacities, competencies am I going to get out of classes like that? And so we went with this decision, which was to call these areas by what we hoped they would achieve through taking classes that fell into these areas: arts and creative expression, meaning and interpretation of the human experience, scientific investigation, qualitative analysis, analysis of the social world, civic life and engagement. Now, we have all been in academics for a long time, so we can see through that. Like, art is art, right? And we can see that meaning and interpretation of human experience is probably mostly literature and philosophy and science classes and science investigation. But there are some surprising things that happen here that make, so for example, history could be under meaning and interpretation of the human experience or under analysis of the social world. So it's a little bit more messy in terms of the way that the disciplines don't slot into any one area. Instead, we look at the course and we say, what is the course? What capacities and skills is the course developing? And then we slot it into that area of the core. And I think the secondary thing that this was not an easy decision, and nor has it ever stopped being debated. But the thing that I think I liked the most about it was that it demonstrated to students that knowledge truly is interdisciplinary. Like, you don't just understand qualitative analysis through math classes, that there are other classes, surprising classes, sometimes sociology classes, that will allow you to achieve those objectives. So it showed how all the disciplines converge and move apart in different ways. And that was a goal of the core curriculum, was to really focus on interdisciplinary learning so that students didn't feel so siloed in disciplines. And I'll say more about that in a minute. Second practical tip: create an infographic and put it everywhere. Now, this is our infographic, and I'll give you a chance to look at it. Wish it could be bigger. But what you'll see is the puzzle, right? You can see that we have the discovery curriculum, mission, and then I haven't talked about real world problems, but I will in a minute. And then this is our inquiry curriculum. What these little things are, they're almost like a legend, and they represent the skills that we were trying to develop: tech skills, mission, a competency in the mission, writing and communication skills, or that breadth of knowledge. So all those things that you want a core curriculum to do. And what we did is we tried to show how each of these skills, are mapped on to different courses that you take. So this helped the students understand these classes in two ways, right? Not just by their subject matter, but also by the skills or competencies that they were developing specifically in that class. So that was the goal, was to show where writing was being developed, where tech skills were being developed, so that they could see that even though the curriculum was based on courses, the skills were being embedded throughout. So I'm going to go now to the last area that I didn't talk about yet, which is make real world connections. And this was our attempt to be our most interdisciplinary class, break out of the box of traditional academics, right? we wanted students to feel the example I often use, right, is I was a literature professor for many years, and I could go into a classroom and I would be teaching Hemingway's Nick Adams stories. And one of the things that always occurred to me, especially in the last 15 years, 10 years, 15 years, is that sometimes I felt like I was being academic, right? I mean, they were coming in and Black Lives Matter was erupting on the street, or climate change was in the news, and we were getting dire predictions for, the rate of climate change accelerating. And they would come into the classroom, and there I was talking about Nick Adams or whoever, and I could see that has its own value. My goodness, absolutely. But I could see that maybe they were looking at me like, the world's on fire out there, and you're talking about this novel. So one of the things, and I think we've all seen this at our institutions, is that many of our classes at Chestnut Hill have focused and refocused themselves. They're still literature classes, but literature in the environment, right? Literature and race, literature and gender. It allows us to use our tools as opposed to 18th, 19th, 20th century. Those things are still valid for majors, but in the core curriculum, connecting the literature and the practice of close reading to something that feels real and urgent can really help spark a natural interest for students. This is actually so that goes throughout the whole core curriculum, but this in particular was a class that we designed to be team taught, and they were supposed to tackle wicked problems that were very hard, very intractable. I'll show you the examples that we had, right? For example, last semester's offerings were global energy crisis, the art of protest and social change, nuclear challenges, energy and weapons, and persuasion, influencing others. And these classes were meant to be taught interdisciplinarily to show students that when you have a difficult problem, a really intractable problem or challenge, no one discipline solves it. Disciplines come together to solve it. So that the sociologist brings insight that maybe the literature person couldn't bring, and the mathematician still a different insight. Now, granted, it was only team taught, but the idea of the class was to focus on a real problem and have students do a public-facing project where they would attempt to develop some response to that problem. And the class would bring in experts either through readings or through guest lectures so that they could see all the different angles of the problem. That was the idea. It was a class designed to help students connect to those urgent problems outside the academic space, to show them how our academic work was not separate from those problems. And it was also designed to utilize best practices in high impact pedagogy, experiential learning, project-based learning, things like that. The other thing that I would say about real world connections is I don't think it's too early, and I know a lot of people don't agree with me here, but to focus on the core in the core curriculum on careers. That's not to say they need to know what they're going to do, but many of the skills that you see in the wheel in front of you right now, these are almost exactly the skills that the core curriculum tries in various ways to develop. It's not a one-to-one match, but I think you'll recognize that these are all skills that we hope that the core curriculum helps them develop. At Chestnut Hill, we decided to subscribe to a service, an online digital assessment tool for career readiness called RATE. You can see it stands for Reflect, Articulate, Translate, Evaluate. And we tried to use it in the core curriculum while I was there. And my hope in arguing for this, espousing this, championing it with career services, was that I wanted students to see that what you're learning in a college writing class, what you're learning in a history class in your core curriculum, really is developing these skills like oral communication or analytical thinking. And what I like about this tool, which I don't have time to discuss, but happy to answer questions about, is that it puts the burden on the student to go in and reflect They look at an assignment or an experience. They articulate how in this history class they really did learn applied problem solving in a way that surprised them. And then they explain how that happened. And they do that in real time as they're taking the class. This tool is amazing. It allows the students to archive their answers over all 4 years. And when they're getting ready to go on the job market, it has an interview function where it will hit interview and throw questions at students. And if they get stymied, they can go into their history of answers to these questions over the 4 years to find a way in which they really did solve a problem in a class, something like that. So it's a wonderful, really wonderful tool. But for the sake of this discussion, the thing that I like about it the most is that I think we need to be talking about careers in core curriculum, because core curriculum develops all those soft skills that we know employers really want. So the last few slides go very quickly. So how to develop, and this is about development and support systems. This is about implementation. So essentially, everybody has to be on the same page. And this is not easy. This was not something we wound up doing as well as I wished. But I was really hoping that we would have retreat days and onboarding and training modules for advisors and new faculty to tell them what our core was. One of my small goals was like, I never ever want to hear any advisor ever say, oh, you can get this math class out of the way. Again, that was just like, I wanted to somehow, if I could mystically ban those words from campus, I would have, and just, imbue more purpose and self-determination in the way students integrated or made their selections around core. So that really required a lot of intensive training, some of which we did, but we didn't do as much as I wish we had. And then in branding curriculum and advising sheets. So you need to have advising sheets and interfaces that are branded. You see that your infographic everywhere. And you really, all around the students, they're seeing this, the core curriculum and the logic of it. And one of these things is a computer interface. At Chestnut Hill, we wound up not doing it. We wound up creating an Excel sheet that does it. But where I am now, the computer system does it automatically. So if you have a class in arts and creative expression, all the classes just appear and you just select the one you want. So you need to make sure you have systems that can support a more complicated core. Like if it's going to be more complicated than all your literature classes fall here, you need to make sure you have a computer system that can support that. And then, again, systems. I suggested, and we did have for a little while, I think we still do, a core curriculum committee. They didn't need to be permanent, but in those first years of implementation, I thought we needed people who were watching the house about which classes went where, in what area of the curriculum. Keeping change logs, which is if you change something, you write it down so you don't get a franking curriculum over time. And really supporting innovation and risk. And this is my big point, right? It's not me, fail fast, fail forward. But here's the thing I want to say about this is that I've been, in my experience with higher ed and core curriculum reviews, you do a curriculum review once every 5-7 years. And then after you do it, everyone's so exhausted. They don't ever want to change a thing about it. They're just like, nope, that we did it and there it is, and we're going to stick by it, even if it's clear that certain parts of it aren't working. And what I would encourage us to do is become slightly more agile. My desired approach here is that if something isn't working, don't wait 7 years to fix it. Go in and have a conversation. There's no reason things can't be more iterative. I know it presents problems for catalogs and stuff, but I think especially if you have a difficult problem, it's worth addressing. And then finally, what I would do differently. I think I would focus on crystallizing the outcomes of the core curriculum a little bit more than we did, and being accountable for which areas of core were developing those outcomes. I would also simplify the graphic and the messaging. Everything that you saw, I think, is way too wordy, too long, don't read kind of stuff. And I would say that some of the things that look maybe wonky, Um, in the core, I would say that that's when you have too many soups in the kitchen. And there are certain things in that core that I will not point out that were compromises, right? The committee could not agree. And so we made a thing that was really complicated, but everybody in the room was satisfied. And I would just suggest that don't do that. Have more personal courage in those situations to be honest with each other that everybody in this room is getting what they want. But is this going to serve our students well? Is this solution the best solution for our students? Because I think, in core curricula, you can get confused between like, let's just get the vote done and get everybody on board versus is this serving our students? And, I think you need to have a lot of personal courage to do a core curriculum review well, because it does get you connected to turf wars and existential crises about what education is. So keep it simple. If you think you're managing too many audiences, you probably are. And then you need to put those audiences aside and put the students at the center. Because, and this is the last slide, I continue to believe, I really do, that core curricula, any core curricula, is a great idea. It's just a matter of how we do it and thinking about what our students need now. But those competencies are every bit as important and vital as they ever were. So all our energy is totally worth it. So thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was a really great presentation. And I am back here again. I can see that self-review have already put messages in the chat. So we'll go to that now, but certainly continue to add your comments and questions here. I'm going to start. Some of these are some similarities here, but what I wanted to ask about is to start, directly to you, Suzanne. I have a question here that says, when assigning courses into the areas, did the faculty identify a preference where a course fell, or did the committee decide using course objectives? Were there any limitations based on the disciplines so students were getting a breadth and depth and working outside their chosen discipline of study?
Amazing question. And oops, yes to all of that. So the first part is it was a conversation. We did have objectives for each area internally, and that was shared out. So a faculty member would apply for their course to be in a certain inquiry curriculum area based on those outcomes. Now, that could be a conversation because sometimes it wasn't totally clear to the curriculum committee, but usually it worked out pretty well because our objectives were clear. The class may have met more, like it could actually be divided between two, but we said you have to decide on one. Now, did it result in any classes or disciplines being harmed or not represented? Yes, that is possible. It is not, I would be lying to say it's not impossible. It's not likely, right? Because so many of the human expression classes are literature classes, right? But is it possible that a student might choose to take philosophy there instead of in the religious studies area and wind up never taking a literature? Yes, that's possible. But I have something to say about that too, which is this is why I kept saying it's more about, I know we're very entrenched in our disciplines and the importance of what we do in our disciplines. But I'll go back to always, it's about how we teach, not what we teach. Because think about the conundrum in the major, for example, right? Like if I'm a literature person, so please excuse all the literature examples, but when I was in college, everything from Old English to Middle English to Shakespeare, to the 20th century was required. I do not believe that is true in the majority of English departments anymore. And this is the kind of pressure we're under in higher ed right now. Is it more important to be comprehensive, Or is it more important to develop people with certain capacities and competencies and dispositions who will go on reading for the rest of their life, right? So, at one point, I really do remember that there were core curricula that Shakespeare was requirement in the core curricula. I think I love Shakespeare and I think everyone should read Shakespeare, but I'm not sure that it's the business of the core curricula to get didactic. I know that sounds weird, but I don't know that core curriculum should be a moment where we're didactic. It should be a moment of invitation and self-development. And that's really, I struggled with that. Whoever answered that question, believe me, I struggle with the answer I just gave you, but at the end of the day, given all the pressures on a core curriculum, that is at least where I personally landed. And the majority of faculty who did vote the curriculum in landed, although I will tell you, I know for a fact that debate continues to this day.
Yes, Suzanne, I would agree with that as well. Certainly, conversations about our core.
Mhm.
I think to echo Suzanne's point, we will continue to have these conversations. Suzanne, one of the questions in the chat, if you want to speak to a little bit, is specifically how the SSJ charism is embedded in the core curriculum at the
Right.
college.
So I think the four places where it's explicitly embedded. So I have to say it's everywhere, right? It's in the first year experience program. The students are exposed to the mission there. It is in our liberal arts discovery seminar as well. But that mission curriculum that I highlighted, which is ethics, global studies, and the religious studies requirements, that's the place where we're saying we're not just referencing the mission, we're asking you to really live and think through the mission in a very intentional way. That's the spot where it's like the mission is highlighted. It becomes the centerpiece of the course in some way. And then in the real world problem solving course, it was a requirement of that course when you're teaching that ideally team taught class. It didn't wind up being team taught. It was a requirement that whatever real world problem you were tackling, you would address in some way how the mission informed your response to that real world problem. In other words, the mission doesn't just live in the for the institution and on the campus. You're going to take this when you're tackling, your problems about climate change. So you articulate for us how the SSJ mission informs the way you and your education here informs the way you tackle those problems. So I hope that answered that question.
Okay, and yes, thank you, Suzanne. And I think it did. And I'm just looking, if please, others, feel free to add to your questions in the chat session. I'm seeing some overlap here. Some of it, Suzanne, is people thanking you and appreciating your talk. So I want to share that as well. One of the questions here is about team taught courses and having faculty members who are full-time earn compensation for, as a independently taught class, they would for a team taught course. I know that's the model that we have here at the college, but I know that's been difficult for other institutions. Do you want to say anything about the experience of the team taught course?
Well, right. So for me, the team taught course in our general core curriculum was actually a matter of equity. Chestnut Hill College has an incredible and well-known and much loved by the students who go through it honors program called Interdisciplinary Honors Program. And it's expensive to deliver in that every class has 2 full-time faculty member fully compensated in that class. So, and I said when we were doing core and thinking about interdisciplinarity, I said, if that's such a great model for them, shouldn't we try to deliver something similar to the rest of our population at least once in their time here? And this is where trying to be honest about my experience. This is where that part I was saying about it's one thing for faculty to dream up the curriculum that they think is best. It's another thing for them to do that in conjunction with administrators who can align them with the realities of the institution. And those things could have been a better conversation when we were doing core curriculum at Chestnut Hill. So we put forth the idea of the team taught course as demonstrate like on the IDHP model. But everybody's got tough times these days. So that was not something that we could deliver. We tried to think about ways around it, and it's probably too much to get into, but whoever's answering that question, if you want to write to me offline, I can share all the different ways that we thought about delivering it around it. But what we wound up with is one instructor in the class. But the goal is that instructor has to bring a minimum of, I think it is 3 or 4 guest lecturers in across the semester to illuminate different aspects of the problem. So that's where we wound up. It wasn't the model we put out there, but I think it works well enough. If you want to see a model that works incredibly well, you could look at Georgetown has a model for this, where they actually have teams of classes and a professor takes part of the class for the first part of the semester. So there are two professors and they switch midway through the semester. So they have, let's say it's climate change and it's a scientist and it's let's say a literature person. They each take the class for 7 weeks. They have a symposium in the middle where everybody gets together and then they flip for the other 7 weeks. So that's a model where each professor is in some way responsible for their course. So that's one way to do it. There are a couple other ways to do it, but happy to talk more if anybody wants to reach out to me.
Thanks, Suzanne. The other question I'm seeing in the chat relate to mission. So like, for example, one of the questions has to do with, how do we encourage faculty to incorporate mission into their syllabi? Another person has asked, are there specific areas when we were looking at the core and developing it that specific parts of the mission that as an institution we're focused on? And so, for example, at Avila, I know the focus is on service. So can you talk a little bit about those two areas?
Yeah, so let me just think through that for a second. What was the first part of that again, Andra? Tell me that again.
Sure. How do we encourage faculty to put parts
right.
of the mission in the syllabus? And then the second part was, is your specific area of mission that we focus on, like service?
So getting the faculty to, at least at Chestnut Hill, to put mission into their syllabus is not very hard. We use, at the most basic level, we use Canvas. And our front page of our Canvas shell is front loaded with certain information, including the college's mission. But also we are strongly encouraged, all faculty are strongly encouraged to reflect on how the college's mission is informing what we're teaching, how we're teaching it. And I can't think of a time where that has presented any major challenges. I think maybe I'm going to answer this in a kind of a skewed way, but maybe the onus isn't actually on the faculty member to do that, but rather on the student, right? So I know for a fact that Methodist University, one of the folks that's on a working group where I'm exploring these ideas, they have introduced through a NetView grant, Andra, they have introduced, NetView is an amazing institution or grant structure, but so, and network, a purpose planner. And one of the big key takeaways for the presentation we're doing in Washington is that we are measuring the wrong thing. We measure the class. And if we want to measure transformation, we have to measure the student across time. You are what you measure, and we're measuring the wrong things if we want to focus on transformation. That's one of our biggest takeaways at that presentation. And then we challenged ourselves to think, how do you measure transformation? And one of the ways is something that Methodist University put together through the NetView grant called a purpose planner. And of course, faculty change. That's the problem. Faculty think about their own courses, but the advisors don't. I don't know how many of you have professional advising or academic advising or success advisors, but the advisors track with the students across 4 years at many institutions. So the purpose planner at Methodist, I believe, is an exercise done with your advisor at the end of every semester around a set of questions that harken back to mission and learning objectives. And the idea is really to track, and it also, sorry, I get so excited about this, but it's designed to track your failures as well as your successes. Because one of the things we're really interested in is destigmatizing failure. When you start not thinking about approach education as transactional, every grade doesn't have to be an A. And that comes down to what we measure too, when we can talk about ungrading and alternative measures of grading. But I think the main point is I would maybe flip that question and say faculty should be talking about mission, and especially in the moments in the curriculum when it's clearly inflected. But I also think the onus for tracking engagement with mission, engagement with objectives is also on the students. And the question then is, how do we create structures, assignments to measure that transformation over 4 years?
Thanks, Suzanne. Another
Sure.
question has to do with delivery of the core curriculum. So, with the courses, for example, I know originally when designing these, a lot of involvement was had by full-time faculty and full-time faculty teaching these courses. But of course, as you said, in the last several years, there's been a lot of changes at the institution here at Chestnut Hill College. So, do you want to speak to, as the core has evolved, courses being taught by faculty or not full-time? And do we offer them hybrid or online? And do you want to speak to some of those conversations that we've had at the college?
Yeah, sure. I don't, so Chestnut Hill is still primarily a face-to-face institution. I think increasingly our graduate programs are online, and we do offer some classes online. I don't have the ratios anymore, Andra, but we were primarily face-to-face when I left. And considering the population that we serve, and what we know about student success, I think that's a really good practice, being in a space with personal face, personal accountability. A lot of our students, if it's done right, can find when you close that classroom door, it's like a relief from all the other things that are weighing on them, pulling on them, and they can focus. And if you present that in the right way, it can be a very powerful experience for students who are otherwise very burdened and have a lot of other things going on in their lives. Um, but I think in general, I feel I always question myself when I sound this old-fashioned, but I really do believe most core curriculum should be delivered face to face because I think it's relational. I think it's relational. I think it's about accountability. I think it's about interpersonal skills. It's about things that the online environment can be great for certain kinds of learners, but core curriculum is not that space, right? That's maybe for specialization and majors. That's my opinion. In terms of part-time faculty, I will just go ahead and give a shout out to Andra here, right? Because, and also to my colleague Keely McCarthy, who does first year writing at Chestnut Hill. Both of them in their different roles have focused on ongoing part-time faculty development and belongingness, right? Making sure that part-time faculty who often teach at different institutions feel seen and appreciated and valued by the institution. Now, I don't have any problems with what Andra and Keely are doing. I have a problem with what higher ed is doing more broadly around part-time labor, but that's a different story. But what I would say is the other more strategic and systems thing you can do is create blueprint courses. If you do have a lot of, this is if you use a Canvas LMS, but I'm sure the other LMS have something similar. But if you are a part-time faculty member who teaches at multiple institutions, you might be tempted to bring the writing class or the discovery classes you teach at a college X, college Y. And one way to avoid that is to create a blueprint in Canvas, have your coordinator for that program create a blueprint in Canvas, and that filters automatically down to everyone who teaches that class. Now, your full-timers, you can mess around with that and you can still adjust it and change it. But for a part-timer who might be burdened, like, oh God, how do I get their mission into this? Well, now it's delivered to them. So there are two sides to this. One is including the part-timers and making them feel seen, heard, valued. The other is setting them up for success by handing, and I know full-time faculty sometimes get antsy around this, going, oh, it's an impingement of academic freedom. It really, really, really is not. It's a service, and then you can decide what you want to do with the blueprint once you get it. But for the increasing number of part-timers that we expect so much from, that blueprint can be, you know, a real gift.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. I think we have time for one more question here. And I'm hearing from someone who is talking about teaching a course in death and the afterlife in world religions. And as part of looking at student outcomes and transformation, it says here that the faculty member said that they find that students are, when they ask at the beginning of the semester and the end of the semester about the students' fear of their own death as well as a loved one's death, they see change. They see transformational change. So that's one example of how it's looked at. Do you want to speak to that or talk about any other specific classes or examples where we've been able to see that transformation happen?
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I'm trying to see, I can see, hold on, my cursor's acting funny. Lori, I think that's absolutely right. And when I said when we measure at the course level, we measure the wrong things. I didn't mean to say that transformation doesn't happen in every single course, because clearly it does. But our problem in core curriculum specifically is tracking how a student's competencies and capacities develop across 4 years. So how your death and dying course is only one piece of a larger transformation about thinking critically or perspective taking that we want to see a student develop as they move through the curriculum. So it's a both and, not an either or. The course piece is still important and it's important to the instructor and it's important to the student. But I think there's a piece that we're missing when we don't actually track the student. The more I think about it, quite frankly, it's just institutions are designed around faculty in our courses, but we keep saying we're student-centered. And so it's not to chastise us, it's just to challenge us. Like, how might we add truly student-centered metrics to the way we do the work we're already doing, which is often excellent and often very good. We just haven't been capturing it. And if we really want to move the needle for our students to say, you have to stop thinking about just your immediate job and more about the whole life set of skills you're getting here that will enable you to be successful, not just in your first job, but in the many jobs after that. And that will help you be successful in your interpersonal relationships and in your family life and in your friendships. It's so much bigger than just a job. And, trying to measure that development in students is one of the things that my working group is trying to, create a toolbox for faculty and institutions to be able to do. I hope that answered that one.
I think it does. Suzanne, thank you so much. This was incredibly helpful. And thank you for all the wonderful comments and questions. I know some of you might be following up with Suzanne as our presenter. But
oh, should I put my email
sure.
address?
Yeah, that would be great.
I don't know if it's going to get shared out. It probably will, but
yeah, we can see that in the chat, which is, yep,
yeah,
okay. I think we all see it here now.
Okay, just in case, I'd love to talk to people about this, favorite topics.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much. And this being the final session here of the gathering, I'm going to turn it back over to Martha.
Great. Thanks, Andra and Suzanne. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation and sharing with us all your work about the core curriculum at Chestnut Hill College. and for giving us a lot to think about as we continue to struggle to incorporate our mission and the values and, what we want students to learn on our campuses. On behalf of the Association of Colleges of the Sisters of St. Joseph, thank you for coming and participating in this 2025 National Gathering. I'm so grateful to all of the speakers who shared their knowledge, identified resources for us, motivated us in new ways, both in leading in and outside the classroom, and also reminded us that we each have a responsibility for continuing the life of the Sisters of St. Joseph. As well as thank you to our moderators like Andra that plays an important role in keeping us on track and engaged in the conversation too. And I think it bears repeating that we are so grateful for our sponsors. Their support is really worth acknowledging. Again, our member campuses, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, St. Louis Province, St. Joseph Educational Ministries, Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, Albany Province, Sisters of St. Joseph of Springfield, and the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. So grateful for their support. Behind all of this planning is a planning team of Sister Carol Allen, Dr. Leslie Smith, Shannon Green, and Cara McMahon, who provided the guidance and support to create this program, and our Avila faculty members who graciously volunteered their time and talent to provide a smooth virtual experience. So thank you to all of them. And lastly, thank you to each of you who carved time out of your busy schedules to come, listen, and engage with our program. From our humble beginnings 375 years ago when 6 sisters inspired to meet the needs of the time and to circle the city with love in Le Puy, France. They took small actions which still inspire us and inspire us today. We walk in their footsteps, and we know that you are a part of our work, and I hope that you'll continue to be engaged in ACSSJ's programs. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.